Okay, so through the magic of a video, I've discovered an error, which I mentioned earlier with an annotation, and that is that on the category page, the action should not be category. The action should be add to cart. Okay. And that's because on the controller servlet, it should correspond to this user path right here, add to cart. And in fact, that user path also happens to be in the post method. So that should also be a post method and not a get method, which is the default. Okay, so method equals post, and that should get us what we want. And one of the reasons I made that mistake, if you look at the controller servlet, well, it actually doesn't say that here. This says implement add product to cart action. But this does in fact go back to the category page. Okay, so one of the things that we have to do in this add to cart action is change the user path to category. Okay, so that it gets changed here, down here, to the URL category.jsp. Okay, we're going to do that in just a second, but I'm going to go back to this category page. And before I mess with that add to cart, there's one more item I want to put in this form. And this item is going to be of type hidden. And the reason for that is mainly going to be to pass a parameter. So the parameter I want to pass is named book ID. This is going to be the primary key for the book we're adding to the cart. Otherwise, we don't know what book to add to the cart. Its value, what is its value going to be? Well, look where we're at here. We're in this for each loop, and we're iterating all over these category books. The current book is named book. We're getting the book title, the book author, the book price. And here, for the value, we want it to be the book ID. So let's go ahead and put that in there. All right, so now we have all the information we want to pass to the add to cart action, okay, in our controller servlet. So let's go ahead and modify our controller servlet to handle that request. Okay, so here's the add to cart action. And what do we want to do first? Well, this action, as we said before, is going to create the shopping cart if no shopping cart exists yet. And that shopping cart needs to be added to the session scope. And right now, we don't have an explicit handle to the session scope. We can get a handle to the session scope through the request. Okay, but we want that to be explicit. So I'm just going to put HTTP session. I'm going to create a variable called session. And it's just going to be request get session. We don't have that in our import statement, so we just add that. And the other thing that we're going to expect here is we're going to expect a cart attribute that comes from our session scope. That is a shopping cart object. So what we're going to do is this: shopping cart equals session get attribute, and the name of that attribute is going to be cart, and we're going to expect that to be a shopping cart object. And I suspect cannot find symbol class shopping cart. Okay, let's import that. And incompatible types, object cannot be converted to a shopping cart. This returns an object, so we're going to have to cast that to a shopping cart. All right, and now essentially, if that attribute exists, then that's going to be our shopping cart. So we know the shopping cart is created. If that attribute does not exist, we know that the shopping cart has not been created yet. So the first thing we're going to do in this add to cart action is we're going to check if cart equals null. Okay, because that's what gets returned if the cart attribute does not exist. So if the cart equals null, that means we're adding to the cart for the first time. So we're going to create a brand new shopping cart. So instead of our cart being null, we already have this cart variable, so that's what our cart is going to be. Instead of our cart being null, we're going to set it to be a new shopping cart. All right, and now that we have our shopping cart, we're going to add it as an attribute to our session. Set attribute cart to the object, which is our cart. Okay. All right, so you can see that once we add this to our session, remember sessions last until you close your browser or until the session times out. Once we have that, then when we get a handle to the shopping cart here, there actually is a shopping cart that exists. Okay, so suppose now our shopping cart exists. We're sure of that no matter what. So now what do we do with that shopping cart? Well, we first get the book that we want to add to our shopping cart. And that is going to be a parameter. That's going to be one of our request parameter. Get user input from request. All right. So I'm going to say string book ID equals request get parameter book ID. Okay, so we're getting the text that corresponds to this book ID because parameters are always passed as text. And we may not strictly need this if we do everything right, but this is just kind of a sanity check. If the book ID is not the empty string, okay, then we are going to add the specific book to our shopping cart. So what do we want here? We want to add the book to our shopping cart. So let me just put a little comment holder there. And ultimately, we want to add a book to our cart. Okay, we don't have a variable book, so we want to create that here. We want to say book equals, and then we want our book. If I put a placeholder there and say null, then we want the book that corresponds to this book ID. And of course, that's a string, and we have to parse that into an integer. So how do we do that? We do that through our book facade class. All right, just like we created our category facade up here. And so we could do find all and find when we pass in the ID. We're also going to need a book facade up here. Okay, and we're going to do the same exact thing we did with our category facade. We're going to create an object of type book facade, and we're going to call it book facade. And we're not going to initialize that. That's just going to be created using dependency injection. Okay. And we're going to assume that everything works out fine. So let's go back down here. This is no longer null. Now we've got our book facade. And we're going to find an object based on the ID. The ID we have is a string, so we want to parse that into an integer. And there it is, book ID. Okay, and the last thing, so now we've got our book added to our shopping cart, and the last thing we want to do here is we want to go back to the category page. When we click one of those buttons, okay, when we click this button, we want it to come back to the category page. We don't want it to go to the cart page. All right, we want it to stay on the category page. So in order to do that, I'm just going to set the user path to category. All right, and when I set the user path to category, that goes to category.jsp.